I've recently realised that I've been making a crucial mistake anytime I've tried to get back into writing fiction. I've tried lowering the barrier to entry to increase my consistency. I've tried using a writing buddy to keep me accountable. I've tried challenging myself to commit a certain amount of time each day to my writing. But none of them worked in the long term. Usually they would seem to succeed at first, but I'd always fizzle out again before long. Then I'd be back at square one, wishing I could write more. And the problem is, these tactics all assume that it's only external factors, like routine and time management, that were keeping me from writing. They all completely ignored the possibility there might be mental blocks that are keeping me from writing. So that's why I decided to challenge myself to write 7 fairy tales in 7 days. But how exactly is writing 7 fairy tales in 7 days supposed to help me overcome my mental blocks? I'm so glad you asked. Let me explain. But first, if you're new here, hi, I'm Beth. I'm a writer, knitter, fiber artist and crafter, and I'm on a journey to unlock my creative spark. I hope you'll join me on my quest to live more creatively and bring a little more of the magic and mindfulness of making into your life. Okay, let's rewind a little bit. I've always been a daydreamer. Ever since I could hold a pen, I've been making up stories and writing them down. As a kid, I even illustrated them. Throughout my teens, becoming an author was my life's dream. But sometime in my early 20s, I lost the spark and the drive to write. See, I had this novel that I was determined would be the one that I would finally finish, that would not only be my debut published book, but my masterpiece, which I hoped would be the launching point of a fabulous writing career. And then it crashed and burned. I spent 7 years on that book before I realised it wasn't working, I had no idea how to make it work, and I was no longer enjoying trying to make it work. I didn't even know if I still enjoyed writing at all, if I even still wanted to be an author one day. So, with a heavy heart, I decided it was time to shelve it and take a break from writing. This was in around 2019 or 2020. And I've tried many times to get back into writing over the years since then, with varying levels of success. But nothing stuck. Not for long. I actually wrote a post on my old blog in 2023 about some of the methods I tried that I mentioned at the top of this video, so I'll link that in the description if you're interested in checking it out. More recently, I've realised that if attempts to get back into the habit of writing regularly aren't working, then there might be more of an underlying problem. So I've tried to change my approach of it, encouraging myself to come up with more ideas, and focusing more on finding the joy in writing again, as opposed to trying to force myself to get words on the page. Less pressure, more exploration. And I started to notice why all my attempts eventually petered out. It was self-doubt. Fear. All would be going well, and then, after a few days or weeks of writing, I'd start getting these lingering thoughts in the back of my mind that this was all for nothing. That no matter how much time and effort and heart I put into it now, it would all fall apart eventually. Which makes total sense, right? I spent 7 years dedicating my entire life, my entire being, to a project that ultimately went nowhere. And I started that project with utter faith that not only would I finish that project, but that it would be good enough to be published and be successful. But all that faith did nothing to prevent it turning out to be a dead end, or all the feelings that came along with that. The disappointment, the identity crisis of who even am I if I'm not a writer, and what do I even do with my life now if I suddenly no longer enjoy that thing that always defined me? Why would I have the confidence that any project I start now will bear fruit when all past evidence tells me otherwise? I needed to rebuild that trust, and that needed to come first before any attempt at increasing enjoyment or consistency. But how was I supposed to do that? The answer came from musician Olivia Rafferty on Instagram, who is a huge advocate for what she calls tiny projects. Small, defined commitments to your creative practice, done within small time frames to help you get your spark back and get back into the creative flow. For example, one of the tiny projects that she has done was to write a song a day during the Winter Olympics. The intention is to inject more fun into your creative practice, as well as to lower both the pressure and the barrier to entry. Now, here I should mention that I've sort of tried to do things like this before. Two of the methods for getting back into writing that I talked about in the blog post were somewhat in the spirit of tiny projects. But both of these challenges lasted a month or more. Not quite as small as Olivia suggests. And besides, I simply applied these to whichever project I was working on at the time, which, in both cases, was a full-length novel. So, not exactly small scale or low pressure either. I realised I needed not only a shorter time frame than a month, but also a smaller scale project. Enter stage right, 7 days, 7 fairy tales. But hold up. Why fairy tales? Why not just short stories? Well, it's in part because I like them. It's what I felt excited to write, and that seemed pretty crucial to the core idea of a tiny project and what it's meant to accomplish. Besides, I write predominantly fantasy, and fairy tales fall within that, so it just kind of makes sense. But a possibly bigger reason why I chose fairy tales is the conventions and constraints of the form. What do I mean by that? Well, we often think that creativity is easier when you just have a completely blank slate, complete creative freedom. But that offers such a range of possibility that it's actually overwhelming. Imagine being dropped into a flat, featureless landscape and being told, go explore. And you're just like, in what direction? There's nothing here to explore. Am I just supposed to wander endlessly? Whereas, if you add in some constraints, you're not trying to seek inspiration from a flat, featureless landscape. You're looking around and going, well, there's a magic forest over there, or there's an enchanted castle over there, or, oh, look, a dragon! Organic ideas for short stories come to me very rarely. I knew that all too easily I'd end up in that flat, featureless landscape at an absolute loss for which direction to go in. So if I had any hope of writing 7 of them in 7 days, I knew I needed some creative constraints to give me some starting points. There are plenty of common tropes in fairy tales, from evil witches to mischievous fae to magic swords. There's a huge well of easy inspiration to draw from. Many of them also follow pretty simple story structures too, so I'm much less likely to get stuck in a plot hole or worry about the fact that the plot isn't complex. Besides, original ideas were not the focus, or even the point of this exercise. The point is to lower the barrier to entry and teach myself that I am capable of finishing the writing pieces that I started. So originality is actually completely unnecessary here. And so is quality. These 7 stories don't need to be good. They just need to be done. It matters not a jot how cliched the beginning, middle and end are, just that they have a beginning, a middle and an end. And if I'm really stuck, then I always love a good retelling of an existing fairy tale. The other thing I've often struggled with when I've attempted short stories in the past is expansion. I just kind of fail at being concise. I furnish all these details to each scene for it to be exactly how I envisioned it, and, well, suddenly a little piece of flash fiction is now on its way to being the length of a Robin Hobb book. And guess what happens then? I get discouraged and don't finish it. Yeah, that's exactly what we don't want. So, what's the solution and why is it fairy tales? I knew if I were to complete this, I would need to do things like summarize events within sentences rather than pages, avoid writing in-depth descriptions, and stick to surface-level character development and world building. I just wouldn't have time to do otherwise. It'd be like drawing a rough sketch rather than painting a detailed picture. In a short story, it would feel unfinished. But in a fairy tale? That's a convention of the genre. It's basically a requirement. Okay, I think I've talked about all the whys and wherefores more than enough, so let's talk about how it went. Once I decided I was going to do this, I took like 10 or 15 minutes and wrote down some ideas to get me started. This way, I could get straight into writing rather than scrabbling for last-minute ideas or Worse, avoid doing it because I couldn't think of anything at that particular moment. These were just some themes, characters, and tropes that I liked the sound of and wanted to write about, that I could refer back to during the challenge when I wanted a bit of a head start. Some were things that were commonly featured in fairy tales, others were themes I wanted to explore in myself, and thoughts on how they could be adapted to fit a fairy tale formula. I also thought about the fairy tales that I felt drawn to, and made a note of what it was about them that I found compelling or appealing, so that I had a sense of what to include in either a retelling of that fairy tale or in one of my own original tales. Then, it was time to start the challenge. I decided on a Thursday that I wanted to do this, and I saw no reason to put off starting it till Monday. So, I wrote my first fairy tale the very next day. I wrote all my fairy tales by hand in a blank A6 notebook that I keep on my bedside table. This one, actually. The aim was for each story to be around a page or two. No more than 4. I intended to write in the morning while drinking coffee in bed, hence why I stored the notebook next to my bed. But it didn't quite turn out like that. I think I only wrote in the morning once, on the very first day, just because I was so excited to get started. Instead, most of the time, I ended up writing last thing at night, which wasn't ideal. I was trying to write while tired, and instead of just going to sleep, I was worsening the problem by staying up later to finish the story. Not to mention my poor long-suffering partner basically begging me to turn my light out so he could go to sleep. Oh, poor guy. To my surprise, I felt most excited about the themes I came up with myself, which don't usually come up in fairy tales as far as I'm aware. So I wrote these ideas in the first 3 days, with 2 of them being different takes on the same theme. Then, on the 4th, 5th and 6th days, I ended up writing stories from ideas that weren't on my pre-prepared list. To be fair, my partner came up with one of them, so credit to him for that. But, it was my take on it, so, teamwork. And one of the other ones was actually a folktale from the world of one of the bigger writing projects I'm currently working on, so that was pretty cool. It's basically making progress on my novel while writing a short story. I only went back to my list of ideas again on the final day, and did my one and only retelling. I really thought I would do more retellings than that. I thought I would not have any original ideas. Mostly, I was pretty excited to write my fairy tale for the day. It never felt unachievable, even when I left it till quite late. I even found myself writing other writing projects at other times of day. So, as well as teaching me that I could trust myself to finish little fairy tales, it was also just generally stimulating my creativity and making it easier for me to jump back into writing anything at all, which was great. Towards the end of the week, I did start to tire of it and feel like I was scraping the bottom of my barrel of ideas. I don't think I could have done this for much longer than a week, to be honest. But I did do it. Well, technically on a couple of days, I didn't finish writing until after midnight, but it's totally not a new day until you've been to sleep, so it still counts, right? Right? Yeah, that's totally how it works. Yeah. Anyway, it's my challenge and I say it counts. So it counts. Okay? Has it cured me of my self-doubt? No, of course not. I think it'll take far more than just a single week of writing 2 to 3 page fairy tales to build up the trust in myself that I'm capable of writing a novel. Never mind a series of novels like one of the projects I'm planning. But it definitely did help. I came out of this feeling hopeful that if I can do this once, I can do it again. And if I can do it again, then maybe I can consistently work on an ongoing project for a week. Maybe even 2, ? And if I can do that, then maybe I can one day build back up to writing something novel length, or even a whole series? Dare I suggest? Dare I hope? Maybe. It's a really good first step in the right direction, and I'm really proud of myself for doing it. And I'm also proud of the work I made in the process. Like, to say that they're just scribbled first drafts done in no more than an hour, sometimes with no prior thought put into them, I'm surprisingly pretty happy with them. I feel like I've finally found the main problem that's been standing in my way for all this time, and I feel like I've made some good progress in starting to whittle it down, which is really all I wanted, so I'm calling it a win. I was under no impression that solving a writer's block this big, that I've had for this long, was going to be an easy fix. Baby steps are what's needed here. Progress in this is better done little and often, not in one big leap. I need to chip away at these insecurities slowly, a little bit at a time, and train and rebuild those creative muscles the same way. Which is why I'm going to be doing the artist's way, but more on that in my next video. And regardless of how much or little it restored my faith in myself, which, as I said, it did start to do, I had fun while doing it, which is just as valuable to me. It tells me that I do definitely still enjoy writing, and I do still want to be a writer. The dream's still alive, folks! Plus, it turns out that writing a quick little fairy tale is a great writing exercise to jumpstart the creative gears in my brain and get the ideas flowing. I've actually already used writing a short fairy tale as a writing exercise before a writing session for one of my other projects, and it worked great for getting me in the writing zone. So you don't even need to do a 7-day challenge. You can just do one here, one there, as and when you need or wish. Would I recommend someone else doing this? Yeah, absolutely. If fairy tales are your jam and you need a little creative boost, go for it. Especially if, like me, you're struggling with self-doubt, particularly around completing what you start. I definitely think this can help lift you up a bit. Maybe it would also be good if you're new to writing and you'd like to get some regular practice in. I'd love to hear how it goes if you do give it a go. Or maybe you have some other tips for recovering from a creative block that you'd like to tell me all about in the comments. Either way, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and got some helpful advice out of it. If you did, please click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, feel free to check out my other videos for more adventures in creativity. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye.